Landlords of rent-controlled buildings in New York City are going bankrupt as their property values have plummeted more than 40%. I'm Tony, and this is Real Estate Investing and Landlord News. All right, so I have an interesting article for you today. And once again, it's going over the whole topic of rent control in New York City in particular. Okay, so as I have mentioned many times before, in 2019, they passed a rent control law, or well, they call it a rent stabilization law up in New York, which basically does not allow landlords to be able to increase their rent to cover the cost of upgrades, maintenance, repairs. And on top of that, we threw in this eviction moratorium nonsense in 2020 all the way up until 2023, where landlords weren't able to evict tenants who weren't paying rent. So you had a lot of landlords who ended up in serious financial trouble. But that's not all, okay? We have huge amounts of inflation going on, and that inflation has caused interest rates to go up. So when these landlords go back and, they have properties that they bought 5-10 years ago and they're forced to refinance, they're getting horrible interest rates and they are instantly upside down. Okay, they're upside down. You bought a property 10 years ago with the intent of moving tenants out, upgrading the units, and then being able to raise the rent up. And in 2019, your whole business plan was destroyed. It was destroyed by the city, and you know what? I believe that the people had good intentions. They just were too ignorant, too dumb to realize the mistakes that they were, making. Okay, they didn't realize that, hey, we're not going to actually make housing more affordable for those people who need it. Instead, what we're going to do is we're going to make housing more dilapidated. We're going to make it so that landlords are less likely to do repairs. We're going to create slumlords. That's what they did. They created the slumlords. People who no longer could even afford to repair their properties because of the laws in the state that don't allow them to raise the rent to cover the cost of the repairs. So yeah, you created the slumlords with your stupid rent control laws, and now you're sitting there, hey, I can't believe these people aren't maintaining their properties. Well, what do you think was going to happen? What do you think was going to happen? You think they're going to pull money out of thin air? No. Absolutely not. So yeah, this is a ridiculous situation. Okay, we got a situation where the government puts false price controls on the rent, right? The government doesn't allow builders to build new properties, so we're never going to see more supply. And so all we're going to see is prices continue to rise even with these rent control policies in place. Housing did not become more affordable since they passed this law. It did not. Okay, it's become less affordable. So what does that tell you? That tells you that the law does not work. It doesn't work. And, anybody who understands the laws of supply and demand, they would know why it doesn't work. So before I get into the article, go ahead, hit the like, subscribe button, and leave a comment down below and let me know what you think. Are you surprised that landlords in New York City are really struggling? Rent control landlords in particular, okay? They have absolutely decimated the market when it comes to these properties, because the property owners are in a position right now where they can't make money. They can't make money. They're holding on for their lives. They're holding on like, oh, maybe we can survive. Maybe this law will fail. The Supreme Court decided not to hear the challenge against rent control. So that means this law is going to remain in place. That is unfortunate. As I mentioned before when I covered that story, you know what? The Supreme Court needs to step up and get rid of these rent control laws all throughout the entire country, because it is in my opinion, right, it is a constitutional violation, okay? Unlawful taking of private property for public use without just compensation. And you can argue all you want. Oh, well, no. This isn't... The government isn't taking the property. Yeah, well, they are taking the means of, basically they're taking the landlord's income away. They're taking the landlord's income and they are giving it to the tenant. That's what they're doing, okay? So anyway, I'm on a rant once again, and let's get into the article and see what it says. This article is coming from globestreet.com, and it says, building owners bailing on rent-stabilized apartments in New York City. Yeah, and this is actually a pretty funny article because they actually cover a nonprofit landlord, okay? And I don't usually talk about nonprofits because a lot of them are government subsidized, but even a nonprofit landlord that owns these rent-controlled units couldn't make the numbers work. So let's see what the article says. New York City's 2019 rent control law, which capped annual rent increases on rent-stabilized apartments, may be here to stay, but the list of owners who are bailing out on these multifamily properties due to the untenable cost of maintaining them keeps growing. This week, Maltz Auctions is auctioning more than 20 apartment buildings in the rent-stabilized portfolio of Food First, a Brooklyn-based nonprofit that provides community services, including food pantries and vocational training. The properties are listed on Islip, Long Island-based Maltz's website as nonprofit dispositions. The largest asset for sale is a 17-building, 51-unit portfolio at 575 to 595 Grand Avenue and 399 to 413 Street, Marks Avenue in Prospect Heights, according to Maltz's website. A Food First board member told The Real Deal that the rising cost of maintaining the apartments, combined with a large backlog of overdue rents from tenants who could not be evicted during the pandemic, has made the properties a serious liability. How many other landlords, not nonprofits, but for-profits out there, are facing the exact same issue? Okay, they created this problem, and you look at what is the cause of all of this? All of this is caused by the rent control laws, two, the eviction moratorium. Okay. You bankrupted these companies. You bankrupted them. And so, this is a bad situation. And, don't think that this is just, this is only going to affect these super rich guys and all these tenants will be just fine. No, the tenants will be living in dilapidated buildings, okay, run by slumlords. And the slumlords are really just landlords who have an inability to make the repairs. They can't because they're not making any money. If you had, let's say, 20 or 30% of your tenants not paying rent, and on top of that, you're unable to raise the rent on those tenants who are paying, well, how are you supposed to make any repairs? Okay? All of our costs have gone up in the last few years. All of them. Insurance costs, property taxes, maintenance, capital expenditure costs have gone up. Property management, what we pay our employees has gone up. Yet we are expected to just eat those losses so that the tenant can have cheap rent forever. Well, that's not reality. And the reality is that the landlords can't maintain all that stuff I just listed off. So what is happening is they look for the easiest place to cut, and that might be maintenance. And you'll read the articles. Read the articles. You'll hear about, hey, this building is falling apart. They haven't repaired the heat. The place hasn't had heat all winter. Like, why do you think that is? Do you think that the landlord just was like, oh, you know what? I'm just going to be evil and, not repair the heat? No, you can't afford it. That's what happens when you take away their ability to raise the rent. Gee, they can't figure out this on their own. They just seem to be working in a fantasy world where all of these people have infinite money and can just keep making repairs even though they're not getting paid themselves. Real estate firms have been offloading rent-stabilized apartment portfolios in New York City this year for huge discounts. Last month, Sentinel Real Estate sold 24 properties encompassing 1,300 rent-stabilized apartments in Upper Manhattan, Crown Heights, and Brighton Beach for $180 million, which represents a 40% discount from the previous sale price. Sentinel paid almost $300 million for the 1.2 million square foot rent-stabilized portfolio, which it acquired between 2015 and 2019, before the enactment of the 2019 rent control law. Yeah, a 40% loss, okay? That's huge. That is humongous. That basically put this company out of business, okay? And it's... I know what you're thinking. You're like, hey, these are super rich people. Who cares? Who cares, right? And that the problem is that when you think like that, you're like, okay, so No large businesses, no large landlords, none of these people with hundreds of millions of dollars wants to invest in your community. They don't want to because they can't make any money. So what happens to a community when it loses, the big money names who want to come in there and invest in it? They start going over to places where landlords and property owners are treated more friendly. Well, the community starts to fall. And I know New York is, the largest city in the U.S., the center of the world in so many different aspects, right? But that doesn't mean it can't fall. Once upon a time, Rome was the center of the world. And now, it's still a big, important city, but it has lost a lot of its luster, okay? So, that's a warning out there saying that, hey, don't take for granted those people who continue to invest their money and want to make your city a better place and keep it a nice place. So, one of the things interesting in here that they had in this article was the fact that, hey, this is not only affecting landlords, this is actually affecting the banks as well, because the banks, they lend a lot of money to landlords, and these landlords are suffering. So that means the bank in turn is also suffering, right? It says the largest lender to rent stabilized apartments in the city, New York Community Bank, which bought $38 billion of Signature Bank's assets from the FDIC, sent shockwaves through the financial sector last month by reporting an additional $2.4 billion in losses on commercial real estate loans. NYCB, which reported losses in Q4 2023 of $252 million, said it had discovered material weaknesses in its internal controls. The bank took several emergency steps to stop the bleeding, including increasing a reserve for future credit losses to $552 million, taking a $185 million charge-off, and cutting dividends by 70%. So basically, the banks, they're not getting paid by these landlords, or the landlords are walking away from their loans because they are, upside down due to these laws. Okay, they are upside down due to these laws, and that is affecting this bank seriously. They're taking hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars worth of losses. And, we went through a panic just last year over banks possibly falling and causing, just basically a domino effect in the economy. And that's exactly what could happen here with this bank that bought, Signature Banks. Signature Bank was one of the banks that failed last year. They bought their assets. So, we're seeing that, hey, you know what? This is something that could affect more people than you could imagine, okay? We don't want to see the entire economy fall, but that is what, this is a key indicator of all of this happening. And you know what causes this? What causes this? Free markets, would have prevented a lot of this from happening. If rent control wasn't in place, if these markets were truly open, open to building, open to investing the way you want, open to raising the rents to whatever level you want, well, we wouldn't have this issue. But the government, they stuck their hand up in the free markets thinking they could control everything, and they created this problem. So anyway, I'll leave a link to the article in the description down below. Let me know what you think of this whole situation.